As the circle of knowledge increases, so does the circumference of darkness around it. Experts tell us that we are in the fastest period of technological innovation ever. Some say that over the next 20 years, we will become 1,000,000 times more technologically advanced.
Amidst all this progress, somewhere out there, someone has an idea that could protect our troops, render the worst weapons harmless, an idea that could help us cure or prevent diseases like Ebola and anthrax. Or we might find a uniform that can sense chemical threats for the warfighter before they're even harmed by the effects. Maybe an idea that can change the world. You never know what you're going to find out there in science and technology. DTRA CB's job, our job, is to find that idea and make it a reality.
It's a job that gets more difficult and more vital every day. We face a number of threats to our survival. The number is likely to increase in the future with the development of new technologies and new ways things can go wrong. Most of the threats we face come from the progress we have made in science and technology. Consider CRISPR, a new technology that lets us make fast, precise, and inexpensive genetic changes. This technology has the potential to genetically engineer away a host of diseases.
However, in the wrong hands, CRISPR has the potential to create new, more deadly biological threats. We have to be able to counter threats like this.
We are in a race, perhaps the most important race we've ever run. Light racing darkness. We win this race by out-innovating those who threaten us. In order to outrace the threats against us, we have to first know when we are at risk.
DTRA CB is working within the Department of Defense to develop next-generation wearable sensors to warn troops that they've been exposed to a threat, as well as to monitor their overall health. We've also created the biosurveillance ecosystem. This prototype system makes forecasting disease outbreaks similar to predicting the weather. It provides our leaders and warfighters a real-time, early warning of any biological threat.
Next, we need to know what we are up against. Faced with the possibility of both naturally evolving and genetically modified diseases, we need to quickly and accurately identify the threat.
We've developed EDGE, a fast, easy-to-use device that can be deployed on the front lines to identify a threat down to its genetic makeup in minutes, as opposed to today's technologies that could take days or weeks.
In this new era, we have to expect that we are going to come up against new threats, things we haven't faced before.
We must be able to quickly and effectively respond to these novel threats. We're developing a technology that enables us to test new drugs in test tubes, reducing the cost and time needed to conduct clinical trials. This same technology can also help us develop drugs to cure and prevent diseases of all types, faster, cheaper, and better.
ADM, the Advanced Development and Manufacturing Facility, allows us to rapidly produce medical countermeasures for warfighters facing threats. In collaboration with our DoD service laboratories, we built a science and technology infrastructure ready to meet surprise. These are some of the innovations that DTRA CB is developing now, today.
What really excites me is the promise of tomorrow, finding the next great advance, the penicillin of this digital age. It's out there, somewhere in the expanding light of progress. We're going to find it.
Join us, work with us to create a better future.
Spent 27 years in the Army as a chemical defense officer. During that time, I went around the world, and part of that was all about dealing with threats from Chem-Bio nuclear hazards on the battlefield. I retired from the Army about 5 years ago to take over this research and development position that I'm currently in, and been doing a lot of work since then. So I'll walk through some of the things that we need, what we're looking for from industry, and what government has some shortfalls and where we could use some help. So I work in an organization called Defense Threat Reduction Agency. So this agency was established back in 1998, basically to go about countering weapons of mass destruction. There's a variety of organizations that formerly were agencies that were combined in the agency at that time. You may have known about Defense Nuclear Agency, Cooperative Threat Reduction Program, the On-Site Inspection Agency, And then later on, my organization, the Chem-Bio Defense Program, was incorporated into the DTRA mission. But really, DTRA is all about going out and countering weapons of mass destruction around the world. Obviously, we would like to be left of boom wherever possible. And then within my program, it's all about response. So if a Chem-Bio event occurs, how do we respond to that event so that we safeguard both our soldiers, our warfighters out there, as well as the nation if someone were to use a device within our country. Our footprint is around the world. We're embedded in every combatant command, and we really are one of those agencies that provides combat support and subject matter expertise on how to counter weapons of mass destruction, how to deal with it, how to plan against it, how to operate in that kind of environment. So that's kind of what the mission does. The threats really are varied. So really, we're focused on chemical warfare material, biological incidents, radiological and nuclear, as well as countering improvised explosive devices. So most recently, we picked up an organization that was the counter threat that worked against countering IEDs, improvised explosive devices. So threats are varied, and many of them go back traditionally in history. My program specifically focuses on the chemical and biological threats. So we kind of entered the modern era of chemical warfare back in 1917 when chlorine was used on the battlefield, caused a lot of disruption. Over time, the threats have evolved. We've had nerve agents that have been developed specifically to kill humans. We've had blister agents that were used in World War I. So you go down the list of all the things that have occurred over time, and there's a lot of chemical hazards out there that were weaponized. Obviously, we're a member of the Chemical Weapons Convention, so we don't have an offensive program at this point. We're destroying all the material in the U.S. program. And most of the world, other than a couple countries, have signed on to the Chem Weapons Convention and no longer are threats. But in the background, there are classified programs that we know about of folks working on materials that are of concern to us. So in my office's job, both in Chem and Bio, is to provide both protection for our warfighters as well as medical countermeasures to deal with threats should we face them on the battlefield or here in the country. So it really is the threat that we face. When you look at the biological side, our primary focus is on the CDC Category A, Category B biothreat pathogens. So we're talking about plague, anthrax, you go down that list. There's a variety of things that are very nasty bugs that will kill people. And in many cases, they were weaponized by folks that we're concerned about today and could be readily weaponized again in the future if they decided to do that. So our program, again, is chasing after how do we provide medical countermeasures and protection should we have to face those on the battlefield. And I'm going to talk a little bit about acquisition reform, agile business practices we've been bringing into our organization over the last couple years. Since the last non-dilutive funding summit that I attend, we've had some tremendous changes in how we go about doing business. We really are trying to be faster and leaner than we've been in the past. We're trying to get from contract acceptance to award of funding much quicker than we've done in the past. We can't win fights with our foes out there when they can go and buy Samsung 10 phones, and by the time we get through the contracting process, we're getting a Samsung 6, right? That's how it used to be. So we are changing how we do business. We're trying to be much more agile, and that's part of why I'm here to talk to you today. The Chem-Bio Defense Enterprise that I work within was established back in 1994 after Desert Storm, when Congress felt like the Department of Defense really wasn't prepared to meet the chemical threats in Iraq. And they established programs specifically to drive these programs within the Department of Defense to work on the programs. Within that organization, there's three major organizations. I am one of the triad, one of the three. I run the entire science and technology program. So everything that goes from a college up to a prototype comes out of my program. That includes on the for medical devices and medical therapeutics and vaccines. We take things up through phase 1 clinical trials and phase 2B, I think it is, efficacy. And basically, we are the screen before it goes into advanced development, which would be large-scale manufacturing, procurement, and the distribution to the force. So we are kind of like the screening gate for most of the medical countermeasures that come into the DoD for Chem-Bio threats. There's a whole other medical program that looks at other things like dengue and chikungunya and those other things that are endemic threats in regions. That's the Defense Health Agency. So if you have countermeasures in that, or you have medical devices or things in that area, it's a different organization that works in those. So we are specifically looking at threats that we know have been weaponized or people are working to weaponize them. All right, that's kind of where my program works. And it's all about delivering products to the warfighter. I took over this position about 5.5 years ago. At that time, it really was much more focused on papers and presentations and patents and all the glory that goes with being in academic stuff. I have really retooled my office to be chasing products. We are developing products for warfighters and for the nation. That's what it's all about. So we're not, we're very rapidly, we're using the mantra, kill it early, kill it fast, get it moving through the process. We're not holding on to stuff. So you're seeing us try and adapt to the more prevalent method of getting countermeasures developed for our warfighters. I've kind of been the program into 3 areas that are of importance to the Department of Defense. The first one is integrated warning, early warning, integrated layer defense, and preparing for surprise. And I'll go through each one of those a little bit as we go on. So I'll tell you, I taught at West Point, and cadets always were kind of hard to gauge what they wanted to do, but they would often interrupt. So if you have questions as I go, I'm actually okay with taking questions kind of as we go, because slides are just a crutch. I kind of want to know what you want to know, and I want to kind of get across to you what I need. And the slides are just a tool to kind of get there. So if you have a question, I'm okay with you raising your hand as I'm going to kind of clarify some points, because that actually will kind of help you get what you want to achieve from this meeting, and help me too, because I kind of understand what it is that you're interested in. So don't get too stuck on this. If something's interesting, we can stop and pause on that for a little bit and reflect. All right, so I've been pretty busy since, like I said, when I took over. When I first came into the program, we were dealing with the Syrian chemical use of nerve agents on their own people in the country. I worked with developing the prototype devices that destroyed the declared chemical material that Syria had generated over time. So we were able to develop a field deployable hydrolysis system. We put that on the U.S. Navy ship Cape Ray. Actually destroyed 600 metric tons of chemical warfare material out in the Mediterranean in the space of 42 days. And we met the Organization for Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, OPCW, technical requirements for destruction. So it was all treaty verified. We were able to do that in 9 months. All right, so when we think about government doing stuff, doing something in 9 months is usually not the norm. But as I said, what we have been trying to do is retool how we do business so that we're actually trying to move things much faster through the line. So we went from mission, we were told you will do this, to delivering a capability in 9 months for that one. When the Ebola outbreak occurred back in 2015 timeframe in West Africa, we had several therapeutics and vaccines that were under very early discovery stages looking at Ebola Zaire. We were able to take 2 of those products. One of them was the EBOV, it was a vesicular stomatitis virus vaccine based from a German company that we worked with, and very rapidly bring that through the FDA regulatory process. And we went from pre-IND to phase 1 clinical trial in about 5 months. We were able to get that. It just got licensed last month, December 19. So we've gone from pre-IND in 2015 to full licensure in the space of about 5 years. So when we work in urgent things and we move things through the process, and one of the things that's great about my organization is we are linked throughout the interagency of the U.S. government, so that when we have an urgent need, we're able to move things relatively quickly, as long as we're describing safety and efficacy in what we're doing. One of the other products was a company, ZMAP Pharmaceuticals, that had a monoclonal antibody cocktail that also works against Ebola Zaire, and that's going through phase 3 clinical trials right now. That also was in a pre-IND stage in 2015. So within 5 years, again, we have stuff in phase 3 that will likely be licensed very quickly. Question?
What are your thoughts on the report that came out from the WHO that respiratory viruses, this was September 2019, that respiratory viruses could infect the world in 3 days and kill up to 8 people? Have you thoughts about that?
Yeah, so that's actually part of my surprise program of how do we deal with, so at the end there, it's gone. I used to have on there at the end, it said, are we prepared for the zombie apocalypse, right? Because that's kind of that, my mission space is huge in terms of how we're trying to prepare for emerging threats, emerging diseases on the horizon. Now, we are very much focused on, again, the pathogens that we know other countries have weaponized. But emerging threats, if you think about the advent of synthetic biology and how relatively much easier it is for someone to specifically re-engineer a pathogen like a virus intentionally to evade diagnostics and not be treatable with the current systems that we have in terms of therapeutics, that's on my plate. That's something that I work in that area. So we are looking at viruses, and flu is a type of virus that we would look after. So, lots of different ways. So one of the things that our program has done is we tried to open up what we look at in terms of, it's got to be a broad spectrum kind of approach, something that works on all viruses. So I've talked to a couple folks today about host-based response or cellular response rather than the specific pathogen that as a response, right? So chasing just a flu vaccine may not be wide enough for us. How do I shut down all types of flu? How do I shut down all types of virus, either transcription or replication, all that throughout that process, right? So we're looking for those kind of things to give our warfighters time so that we can treat them, help their own bodies respond, and develop immunity over time if we can, if we have to, if that's the last approach. So I'll talk a little bit more on that. But yeah, absolutely, that's something that we're interested in. How do I deal with the emerging threat that very rapidly over time? Now, 3 days for respiratory disease, that's really, really quick. But if you think about the transportation system out there, how fast, just people getting on airplanes distribute germs, you actually contract stuff that's pretty quick around the world. I didn't read the study, but I wouldn't be surprised if 3 days or 1 week or 2 weeks is about the amount of time it takes to kind of saturate the planet with something new, particularly if it's very transmissible, right? So again, that's things that is things that we look at. Ebola Zaire was one of the viruses. We look at alpha viruses and filoviruses, so the V's and the E's as well, and some other programs we worked on. And I'll come back some more about talking about surprise later. You may have watched in the news that ISIS was creating mustard agent in Iraq and Syria, using it on Syrian and Iraqi forces. One of the things my program produced was unmanned area vehicles with chemical sensors on them that could actually sniff out where this material was being produced, so we could actually track them down and target them, take them out of business. So that's something that we've been doing. We've also supported United Kingdom when the fourth generation nerve agent was used against the Skripals, who was a former Russian spy, as an assassination attempt. We worked with United Kingdom in the response to how to deal with that. So these were some programs that actually were emerging chemical threats. They actually were very classified for a period of time that we've been working on, and then we saw them being used in the United Kingdom. And then most recently, we're continuing to support the Ebola outbreak in the Congo. So the vaccine that we created for the outbreak in West Africa, we've been doing military transshipments of material into the Congo to help bring that disease down too. So help with the contact tracing and help with providing vaccines and therapeutics to support keeping that outbreak there and going away. We want to end the outbreak. I'm very happy though with the vaccine that we did though, greater than 98% efficacy, very safe for humans. So we're very pleased with that. And that's one of the first vaccines in my time frame that came out of my program. And we got a couple relabelings that we have done, and we've also got a couple therapeutics on the horizon that'll be coming out as well. So part of what I do, so I am a sponsor, but we look for other people to work with us to sponsor these kind of vaccines and therapeutics to counter very pathogenic diseases.
Yeah, Ron, question. You're talking a lot about the categories that you might invest in from different viruses and the like. What is the impact, though, if small companies had a BARDA grant for $15 million or more, but we may have found a neurodamaging weaponized agent antidote for our drug in development, just separate from BARDA, but we still, have taken from the pie, so to speak?
Yeah.
How does that impact your evaluation?
So we'd be very interested to talk to you about anything you find out there as you're doing research, things that either working for BARDA that we may want to repurpose, or something, yeah. So so moxifloxacin, as an example, was recently repurposed to support plague. We tested that against Madagascar plague and a couple other strains, and we're able to identify that could be relabeled to support plague outbreak as well. And it was just when I had LASIK a couple years ago, I thought it was kind of funny. I got moxifloxacin in my eye, basically as the antibiotic. So I'm thinking I don't have plague in my eyes. That's great. So
is grant from BARDA an asset, a liability, or just completely agnostic?
Agnostic, yeah. If you got it, so what my organization does is you may have something that you think works against one of our threats. We will test that. We'll do proof of concept, and we will try and see if we can get that in the program if it works, right? Typically what we'll do is link you up with the military laboratory like Research Institute of Infectious Disease at Fort Detrick, where we have strains of all the really deadly pathogens, and we will test it against a whole plethora
of diseases to see does it work. And if it does, we'll try and bring it into the program. I work very closely with the Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response, Dr. Bob Kadlik, who basically manages the national stockpile as well. So things that come through our program, he'll often talk about. There's about 50 plus things that we have in our stockpile right now. A good number of them, somewhere about 20, came from the Department of Defense program, demonstrated efficacy, and then went into the national stockpile. So we work very closely with BARDA, NIH, NIAID. We actually review each other's proposals in the background, looking for opportunities. So yeah, so we're very interested. If you have something like that, you'll have my email address. Feel free to email me. If I would say, I met you at Non-Dilutive Conference, I have this kind of thing, send me a presentation if you got it, and I'll link you up with my team if we think that's something of interest to do, okay? Good point. All right. So that's so it's been a really hectic 5 years. So you can see just from the things that are going on in the world that chem and bio, we used to think of these things kind of in science fiction. We thought that these were all covered. We thought that the treaties we had out there were going to take care of this. Well, the fact is it's not. And the fact is that the people are trying to pursue things that are outside the treaties. The fourth generation agents were not in the Chem Weapons Convention as a banned restricted chemical, right? So obviously that's a problem. In the biological realm, there's, you can't restrict everything in biology. So it's all in the manner of how things are used. If someone intentionally creates something to use against other humans to cause harmful purpose, that's within our realm of trying to develop therapeutics and vaccines and diagnostics and detection systems to find them, fix them, and counter them. That's kind of our program. So within Department of Defense, like I said, I had 3 big buckets I'm kind of working in. Integrated early warning is one of them. This is really the fusion of sensors and information technology. So we're still using, I'll describe, 5-10 years ago, if a chemical attack occurred on the battlefield, you'd have a soldier out there who a sensor might go off. A sensor goes off, an alarm goes ding, 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 put your mask on. There's an audible alarm. So the soldier knows, I got to put my suit on, but the people around him may not have heard that sensor go off. The soldier then has to get on a radio and radio in. I'm at position XYZ. This event is occurring. I think it's something like X, but I'm not sure what it is. All at the same time, he's trying to put his mask on, his protective suit on, and tell everyone around him something's bad. Gas, gas, gas. Right? So we are trying to get into the 21st century because we have information technology tools that can take information from a sensor, put them into the cloud, military cloud, that then could do algorithms that can tell everybody, do an automatic warning to all the soldiers downrange and say, hey, you are in an area that's about to become contaminated, get protected now. Seconds is all it takes to save lives on the battlefield. That's all we're talking about is seconds. So if we can get out of the loop of where I have to wait for someone on a radio to call in, that goes to someone else with another radio, then has to physically put on a map, where is that stuff going? They have to recognize who all the friendly units are in that downwind hazard area, then get back on the radio and tell them, put your mask on. Why can't I automate that? Why can't I have, you've seen the game Pokemon. Why can't I have Pokemon that is, you look out there and says, there's a contaminated area over there, put your mask on if you walk into that area. Or it comes up and says, gas, 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 put your mask on, you're in a hazard area without the soldier having to do anything. So integrated early warning is a big priority area within Department of Defense right now of trying to bring these kind of tools, situational awareness tools, to lift the fog of war. The fog of war kills us. So how do I take that fog away and get after these kind of things?
So what I'm hearing is currently there's not big analytics. We're using AI to have big analytics. Where those things are going to occur?
We are working on those, yes. So we do not have systems in the field right now other than experimental systems that will give us that kind of omniscience on the battlefield. We'd love to have omniscience that if a round goes off over here, and it always doesn't always take a chemical sensor to tell you a chemical event occurred. So one of the things I've been trying to get across to the force and the Department of Defense is that we can track 50 caliber rounds. So I can track an artillery shell and a mortar as it's in the air, and I can put a radar on that, and they wobble differently. So a round that's got explosive in it doesn't move the same as a round that's got a liquid fill in it, right? When they hit the ground, an acoustic meter can tell me that it didn't go big boom, it just went woof, shh, and something came out. I can hear that round is different. So all through that course, the round looks different, it didn't have a big boom. Just those indicators right there would tell me something's different about this attack. So then we have sensors on the battlefield that as the plume of whatever that hazardous material crosses, those sensors should light up, right? As those sensors light up, we would like to get that back to some kind of milk cloud and algorithms and things that would predict as it's coming in, here's what the meteorological conditions are, this is where that cloud is going, here's all the units that's within that cloud path area, automatically big voice, just like we have for hurricanes or tornadoes, gas, 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 put your mask on. We should have that kind of stuff. Or you're in an all clear area, but if you move over here, you need to put your protective equipment on. We think we can get to that, and we're working on that, and we're demonstrating projects right now to our services, the Army, Air Force, Navy, Marines, that are getting to that capability. But we're still not there yet. We're not at perfection, anywhere near perfection and where we would like to be. But we want to own that realm. We want to get to lift the tactical fog of war and give our commanders better situational awareness. All right? And we'll come back to surprise. Integrated layer defense. One of the problems we have in Department of Defense too often is we want a single box to solve all problems. That is the wrong way to start. Often it takes multiple technologies working together in an integrated fashion to actually get at the capability that you want to do, right? So I'm really pushing my team that as we look at capabilities, how do they link to other capabilities so I have a full spectrum response to an event? Question in the back.
Do you invest on companies like doing augmented reality?
Yes, we do. So we actually are looking at companies to help us with training. So if I have chemical sensor systems, how do they do the maintenance on it using an augmented reality system? I know Army right now is looking at how potentially could do a heads-up display that would augment the soldiers' understanding of the situational awareness of the battlefield that they're on. So yeah, we do. So both for training and primarily for training and for maintenance, we're looking at can I put a goggle on and look at a device and have little pop-ups show me, this is the button that you have to push to do this part of their maintenance step. This is the thing that the module you need to take out to put the next module in. Or training simulations. If you think of like Call of Duty, the Call of Duty Chem-Bio battlefield, trying to do stuff like that. How do we get our troops to kind of understand the operational battlefield they're in and how would they respond, kind of stuff.
So my question is, I'm using HoloLens for Microsoft, but do you guys have your own HMD? Because I'm actually using a different HMD.
Yeah.
So I need to have your...
So I put it this way, I develop the apps that go on the device, but I don't develop the device itself. So like HoloLens is a type of device, would have to get selected by one of the services, and then I would put the capabilities, integrate capabilities into that device. But I'm not going to develop a separate device from what the services are making right now. Does that make sense?
So my question is like, does the that we need to, know, because HoloLens is it's a different hardware.
Yeah, so I'll tell you what, let's talk about it offline, because I don't want to take too much time away, but yeah, we talk about it offline, but specific technology, sometimes there's other people selecting stuff and I'm just making it better. So in that area, the VR realm, that's the case. I'm not actually selecting technology that services use, but I'm making the technology they do select better to include Chem-Bio defense capabilities in them. All right, let me go back to preparing for surprise. So back to the question on the viruses. We have to really look at the broad spectrum of things of what can harm our soldiers. And, we've gone from, where we had a very specific list that was in the Chemical Weapons Convention that says these are chemical warfare agents. So we were developing detectors and diagnostics and therapeutics and vaccines against that very specific list. And what we see now going on is countries have decided that they will go outside the list because, well, if it's not on a list, it's not banned, right? Now, certainly you can work on things that are outside the list for, peacetime purposes, but as soon as you stray in the realm of wanting to cause harm to people, that's where the Chem Weapons Conventions and treaties come to play. But we have to be prepared to deal with those. So when we know about something that's being worked on, then we develop a therapeutic and a countermeasure for that. So I have a huge classified program looking at things that are emerging around the world, and we like to bring folks in to look at those and help us develop countermeasures to work with that. So I would just tell you, it's preparing for surprise. It's a very broad space that we work in. We're looking for broad spectrum approaches to dealing particularly with the bacteria and like antimicrobial resistance, viral resistance, and so forth.
Organizational level is directly responsible for carrying the base level, the brigade level, the deployment operationalization. Who has to make the decision?
Okay, yeah, that's good. So, walk through this. Surgeon General, I'm sorry, yeah, so that we work with the surgeons generals within the Department of Defense who'll make the calls on what the target product profiles would be for the things that we're working on. So they help us define the requirement of how we would deliver something. Would it be by pill, would it be by IM, or by IV? They help us to determine how something would be used. They also help us determine what the indication is, requirement that we're trying to get at. And that would then go through development process. Now at my level, I'm looking at a very broad area of countermeasures that may not have those things developed for them yet. All right, but during the course of the research that we do, we will also develop that information so that once something goes past a phase 1 clinical trial and initial efficacy testing and goes into a more advanced development program, we'll have mapped out that kind of stuff. In terms of the employment of medical countermeasures on the battlefield, that is very rigorously controlled, primarily by the Secretary of Defense in terms of what can and cannot be used. You may have noticed in National Defense Authorization 2 years ago, I believe it was 2 years ago, the Secretary was authorized to work with the FDA to authorize the release of emergency use authorization, EAU type medical treatments working that way. So technically the Secretary can do something that's still very experimental, but that would be an extreme urgency, right? So like if we went into an area, determined that, we weren't prepared to deal with say 3 years ago, we went into an area and Ebola was occurring and I had a drug that was in development and it was past phase 1, had determined initial efficacy, but it wasn't into phase 3 yet. The Secretary could say, we'll use that with cooperation from the FDA, right? But that in terms of use, it comes down as an order. It'll come down from the Secretary or come down from the combatant command that says, we've moved into a biological threat situation. We have the following countermeasures available. They would release those to the medical community if they're not already out in the medical community. We would ship them to the theater if we had them in the States and they didn't have them in the theater of operations. And then they would be administered based on a very strict regimen of how it would be administered. Personal experience for me, when I was in Desert Storm, we were given either anthrax or botulinum countertoxins as part of the prep for going to war. I was in the group that took the counter botulinum therapeutics that were being issued. We actually had to sign an FDA waiver for being an experimental person, being part of the experiment as we went into battle. We were not happy about that, obviously. But knowing the threat that we faced, it was better to have something experimental that has demonstrated safety and some efficacy rather than having nothing at all.
What is the non-medical countermeasure, like environmental sensor? Does that still go to the Secretary of Defense all the way down, or is it the local level?
So I'm not sure what kind of, other than chemical defense sensors out there, we don't have a lot of environmental sensors looking at just. So again, that would go through the advanced, as part of the advanced development process. They'll develop the tactics, techniques, and procedures, the doctrine that describes how a device would be used. So all the chemical sensors are issued, it's called a basis of issue. So each platoon gets 1, each company gets 2, each brigade gets 5. And with that issuing of the equipment, they would get the training on how to use the equipment and when to use the equipment. So they would get the tactics, techniques, and procedures, the TTPs, that tell them how to use that. So that's part of that process. Yeah. But once it's issued, once it's fielded as a system, as a program of record, and it goes out into the acquisition system as a program, just like we have the F-35s are going out, right? And F-35 goes out, you have to train pilots on how to fly an F-35, and someone will decide at an operational level when to put an F-35 in the air and fly it against the target, right? Same goes with sensors on the battlefield. Someone will, there will be a basis of issue how many you get.
There'll be a doctrine of when you pull them out and put them out on the battlefield, and there'll be a doctrine of how you respond when one goes off. Does that help?
How do you currently respond to threats to, say, forward operating troops to Afghanistan, to an attack in which they may have either had a drone exposed to something or a missile explosion? And let's say preliminary data, chemical testing, basically rules out chemicals. And so they're in the biologics, and we really don't know whether it's anthrax, Ebola, botulinum,
Yep.
spores. How do you respond currently? And what's your need for
Yep.
future attacks?
Yeah, so that's a great question, because that kind of gets to the gaps we're working against. So we have a very robust medical presence on the battlefield. We have our, medical laboratories that are fielded to the fronts that support identifying disease and things like that. At Defense Threat Reduction Agency, we have a 24/7 operations center that's looking specifically for anything Chem-Bio, nuke, rad, counter, or improvised explosive device. So that goes right into the system. We start coordinating all the way back into DC, all the way into the foxhole. So we will work with the combatant commander to develop approaches of how to deal with whatever occurs. So whether it's a known chemical or biological material or an unknown, we will walk them step by step through what's available, how can we deal with it, what are the national, so I'm part of the national assets to deal with that. So what's available at the national level, who is it within the interagency? So is it something that I would need to work with Health and Human Services? Is it something I would need to work with Department of Homeland Security? We are tight in this area, and we would basically form an action council that would just basically descend on it. And when we responded to the Ebola outbreak, I mean, it really started at the Health and Human Services. We have a group called the FEMC, which is the Public Health Emergency Response Group, and that group was the one that actually went through what is everything that's available, how fast can we move it through development, coordinated with the FDA to make sure that we were doing all the FDA stuff that we needed to do correctly, so we're demonstrating safety and efficacy. So that group was coordinated as an interagency action, not just a Department of Defense action. So if something occurred on a battlefield in the front, we would use the same kind of approach. We very rapidly go through what's available in the system, what is this thing we're dealing with, we characterize it, and we use the tools we have now. So we have a pretty advanced diagnostic system that we use. We have the ability to genetically sequence pretty far forward on the battlefield. We'd sequence things if it was an unknown. We have the ability to grow things in the front, to trying to do the standard microbiology kind of approach of figuring out what we're looking at. What we're looking towards in the future is, particularly for the unknown threats, how fast can I know someone is getting sick, right? So if someone intentionally uses a biological weapon against our forces, how fast can I know? Because typically, once you start seeing symptoms, your therapeutics aren't going to be effective. So some of the approaches we're looking at right now, we start with wearable devices that will give you physiometric data. We've been working with MIT Lincoln Lab. We think that we can get 48 hours in advance of symptoms, pre-symptomatic, that someone's about to get sick based on just physiometric data. So if we can do that, if we can identify that a large population of soldiers is about to get sick, then the next question is, was it bacteria or is it virus? Because maybe I can start them on some regimen of therapeutics while we figure out what this thing is that we're dealing with. If this thing is not in our diagnostic systems, I can't do a diagnostic and figure out what it is, we're going to sequence it immediately. We got bioinformatics tools that will look at everything, every strain of every pathogen that we know, and we'll compare and try and figure out using machine learning AI tools, what does this look like the most and where is it different, all right? And then what we're continuing to work against, so a big challenge right now is if someone makes something intentionally to be untreatable with our current regimen of therapeutics, how fast can I screen everything in the inventory to see what does work? And then if you want to think science fiction of where we're going, what I want to work on, and it sounds like science fiction, but making pharmaceuticals on demand on the front line, right? So one of the products we're working on right now is a DNA vaccine against Venezuelan equine encephalitis. And there's about two or three products going through the FDA right now that are DNA-based vaccines. One of them is ours. And I think, the AT, Cs, and Gs are pretty shelf-stable when they're far forward. So if I can figure out what it is in the theater without bringing it back,
ship it back home, recreate that, develop medical countermeasures, and then ship back the medical countermeasure and produce it on demand on the battlefield, dramatically speed up the process. All right, now obviously the FDA gets a little concerned about this because, right, we're going to have to really demonstrate safety and efficacy, and that the box that's on the battlefield is the same as the box that's back here in the States. But I think that's part of where we're going. And there's some parallels with, sister programs out there. If you think about NASA with a 5-year Mars mission, your therapeutics and things, if they carry disease with them, then they're going to have to be able to produce things on demand as they go, because you can't carry every pill in the inventory with you on a space mission, right? So there's some parallels with that agency as well that I think is very helpful. But we're looking kind of to get to that point, and it's not tomorrow. This is 20-year focus of, how do I go from an unknown bug on a battlefield, rapidly characterizing it, rapidly screening everything I have in the inventory to see, does it work? If it doesn't work, how do I use in silico computer tools, modeling and simulation to predict some countermeasures that might work, very rapidly test those countermeasures, then how do I very rapidly manufacture on demand? That's kind of what we're looking at. Now, we've got some good commercial touch points here too. So when I talk about the physiometric data gathering, so you've seen a lot of hospitals that do major surgeries and they immediately send people home because you don't want to get a hospital-acquired infection, right? So how then am I going to monitor the people that I send home? How do I look for sepsis over time? So again, checking them out with these kind of data sensors. As someone is at home, it's 24/7 through the internet, back to the hospital. The physician can periodically be tapping in, seeing what the data says about the patient that just was discharged 24 hours ago. And again, if I have 24 hours, 48 hours notice, you're about to get sick, you're getting worse than you are, then that's enough to bring someone back in and change the antibiotic they're on or assess what's going on. So there's a tremendous commercial application, I think, in that space that is growing. And I see some of the bigger companies are moving towards that trend as well. Within the data collection itself, one of the things I've challenged my group with, you'll like this one. Could I 3D print a T-shirt that's got the EKG leads already built into the T-shirt? Now, for us, EKG is one of those indicators that's important for figuring out onset of disease. So I think there's actually an early adopter group out there that'd be interested in something like this. So imagine all the folks that do Ironman and major events like that. They'll pay $10,000 for a platinum bike, right? So they pay $100 for a 3D printed shirt that fits them exactly, that's got their EKG information, that gives them 0.1% improvement on their performance. Maybe, I don't know. I think that some of them will. So I think there's a community that would be interested in things like that too. And for us, I think about, well, what if I could 3D print a uniform for our soldiers that if I know what the threat is to the country that they're about to go to, I could 3D print the uniform that has the protection built into it that fits them exactly, because I 3D scan their body first, fits them exactly, and has exactly the camouflage pattern they need when they show up on the ground. Those kind of things I think are parallel kind of things that would work together. Yep. So actually I have a program working on that too right now. I'm glad you brought that up. So we're working on stem cell derived, so dermal stem cells, you undifferentiate them and then redifferentiate into different kinds of organoids. So organ on a chip technologies that have multiple organs on the same microfluidic chip. I've got 3 different organizations working on these kind of capabilities where I can put heart, lung, liver, kidney, pick your organ, and run a blood surrogate through this chip, hook it up to a mass spectrometer, see what's going on. Typically what you find in drug development is you'll test against just the liver, just the heart. It's the first pass through the liver that causes the problem that deals with the heart, but you never catch it if you don't pass through the liver first. So particularly that, so heart, lung, liver If we can get those 3 on a chip, will tell us a lot of information about a drug as it's being designed. We also have a system called Mimic that looks at the antibiotic response, or the antibody response to drugs to see is that going to cause a very rapid reaction or not. So we're looking at those kind of approaches too. So in that intermediate process, how fast can I do the toxicology, screen stuff out? But we can always use help there, because I mean, we don't have the perfect system yet. We've been working with DARPA on one system that we're putting up at Edgewood Chem-Bio Center that we're going to start testing some toxicology screening with. And we got a couple other opportunities that we're looking on. But I think that's another emergent area, particularly if I was a drug company. If I could screen it through a human system on a chip first, before I ever do a phase 1 trial, sticking it in a human, and I could eliminate it earlier, how much money do you save doing that? Right? Tremendous. Your throughput could go up because you can screen them out faster. So that's kind of one of the things we're looking at, is how we can do that kind of approach. Yeah. Yeah. So this is where I put the Department of Defense hat on. For us, we got to complete the combat mission that we got, right? So we will be focused on, can I get that soldier up, get them back in the fight, and then when they come home from the war, we may have to deal with the impacts of what happened to them when they were on a battlefield. That's not the favorite approach, but sometimes that may be the regretfully callous approach we have to take to fighting and winning wars around the world. And that what we want to do is figure out how to get at that early as possible, obviously. But definitely anything coming through our program is going to be demonstrated as safe and efficacious before it's ever stuck into a soldier. It may take a deployment and troops coming home before we realize that may not have been a good drug. And that's why I'm trying to develop these human organ on a chip capabilities, the stem cell derived capabilities, because most of the countermeasures, most of the vaccines and therapeutics that we develop go through animal testing, and animals are not always the perfect model for a human, right? So I'm actually trying to dramatically reduce the number of animals that we use in a program. I'd like to get it to 0. And then I get a direct human correlation off of these stem cell derived organ on a chip technologies as well. So that's something that we're trying to do. So I'm trying to approach it, definitely have concern about that. Again, as a soldier myself, having taken, I'm on something called the Millennium Cohort Study. So all of us in Desert Storm who are given that botulinum vaccine, they are tracking us every year. I get a medical survey. How are you doing? Are you following, having the current symptoms and so forth. So, Department of Defense is very concerned about making sure they keep track of their veterans as well. And I think there's somewhere around 100,000 troops still in that study currently being observed. But yeah, good question. So I'm going to go on to skip through. I will say how we win is out-sciencing our threats around the world. That means we got to be not one little step ahead. We got to be one technologically huge leap ahead at all the time. We always want to have overmatch. Just think of it that way. I always want to have on my tank the ability to fire 200 meters farther than any tank that's going to fire on me, right? Same within the Chem-Bio defense program. I want anybody who would produce these materials on the battlefield to have to stop and think and say, if I use it, is it actually going to work or not? Because they really have a good program. We really have a good program. And we want to make doubt in anyone that would want to use these against our troops, right? So we got to out-science the enemy. That's what it's all about. I'm all about market disruptors. We talked about some of these technologies already. So how you do business with us, I would say there is one change that's going on in government right now. Many of you probably have seen FedBizOps in the past. That's going away. It's now sam.gov. So if you didn't know that, the FedBizOps started phasing out in November last year. So that's where you're going to start finding announcements going out for what we want to invest in. And let's see how am I doing on time. I'm good on time. Obviously, I do. So if you know what the budget activities are, I do BA1 through BA3. So budget activity 1, which is colleges and universities, through BA3, which is prototype development, advanced prototypes. So this is where my funding is focused within the Department of Defense. I do have partners that do the advanced development, again, scale up, manufacturing, fill finish, fielding, and all that stuff. So I have people that do that as well that I work with. But here's the ways that you can access getting to us to know what we're interested in investing in. In terms of budget, I'm around $200 million a year in the non-medical side of defense, the non-medical Chem-Bio. So these are detectors and protective suits and boots and masks and gloves. And about $200 million a year in the biological side, diagnostics, therapeutics, and vaccines. So approximately a $400 million budget a year. So that's kind of about half and half towards what we invest in. We're constantly looking for people who want to do joint ventures with us. We've done that periodically in the past with folks. They've been very successful when we do it. Let's see. Broad agency announcements are one of the methods that we use. The other method is called the Other Transactional Authority. This is a new authority that DoD has been leveraging that basically works more closely with particularly small startups. So we have what's called the FAR-based contracting method, which is very particular and specific in how you got to demonstrate a lot of financial capability to the Department of Defense to be able to use the FAR-based contracting method. Other transactional authority is a little bit more leeway in how we work with companies that may have never worked with the Department of Defense before in the past. So this is great. We have a series of consortiums that we've established to do this, and these are basically kind of it's not a club, but it's a group, a consortium that you can join. I think it's $500 a year. I'd have to look it up, but you can go online and find out how much it is. And if you're inside one of these consortiums, you'll actually see us drop requests for information and requests for proposals in specific applications. What's good about the Other Transactional Authority approach to contracting is that once we do an initial discussion with you, you do a white paper, basically a 1 to 2 page white paper and quad chart. If that is something that we're interested in, we will contact you back and say, let's sit down and start talking about a statement of work. What are the tasks that you could do with your company? Here's what we want. What can you do? And if we are in a line, the potential exists for us to be able to write a check in 180 days. I've done it in 159 days before. All right, so we can go from I'm talking to you at the table to writing a check for you very quick. So this is what I talk about agile development, agile changing the way we do business. This is one of the ways we do it. Now, coming out of another transactional authority, it must produce a prototype. You have to come out with a thing, a widget at the end, either a therapeutic at a certain stage of development, a vaccine at a specific stage of development, or a prototype box, a detector or something that does a capability at the end. But it's got to be a specific kind of product coming out. It's not a paper, it's not a study, it's something comes out of it, all right? And it's going to get demonstrated and then moved into potentially advanced development. The beauty about the Other Transactional Authority is my advanced developers can co-fund on these kind of contracts. So you've often heard about the valley of death between S&T and advanced development. This kind of contract, we both invest at the same time. So as we write them, we write options in so that the advanced developer can immediately come in with advanced development funding without having to wait to do another request for proposals on SAM.gov, or used to be FedBizOps, right? So that is one of the beauties of one of these, and we're making a lot of projects. We're working on a botulinum antitoxin right now using this process, and we've already cut probably 2 years off the development process by being able to co-fund with one of our acquisition partners on this project, on this product that we're working on. So that's a good approach. And then I think our slides will be made available to you afterwards, so it's good to take photos, but I'm pretty sure these are public releasable, so there should be no problem getting them to you.
So a lot of these projects are associated with unlimited risk. So what happens if the project fails?
If it fails, we cut and go on to something new, right? So we're just like, I don't have a profit motive like a business does, but I have a motive to make sure our troops are protected, right? So if I don't get a product that's going to support them, it's going to help protect them, then I'm going to move on to something that will. And part of my goal is really to screen fast, because we don't want to dump a lot of money into something, it doesn't work, and then we continue to dump money into it. Government, we shouldn't do that kind of stuff. That's not the best use of taxpayer dollars. So we will go through very rigorously test. If it's making progress, we're going to continue. If it's just not going to meet the requirement that we have, we'll stop. But we'll tell you, it's not going to be a surprise. We aren't just going to tell you, hey, take a walk. Now, sometimes the services priorities change. We may be working on a product and the services decide, like the Army and Navy will say, we thought we needed this product. We no longer think we need this product. Cease work, stop work. They will cut my funding off for that work. They just cut it off. I can't help that. But I can tell you as we're going through, I try and be a good storyteller about why something is good and why it's working for them. And usually I'm pretty good at convincing them that we need to continue a project that's being successful. But it's something that's not successful, they will cut. Recently, they're looking at cutting the plague vaccine that we have under development. And it's in advanced development. It's not in science technology, it's in advanced development. But they're looking at potentially cutting that program because it's just not meeting the milestones for development and efficacy that are required by the services. Is that good?
What is the process like for deciding the particular requirements of the consortia that we identified there? How does that emerge?
So it'll go. What you'll see inside like one of the consortia is we'll put a request for information out that says, I'm looking for a vaccine that will work against the plague virus, or plague bacteria. That works against plague. It needs to have kind of the initial kind of requirements. It needs to be onset of protection is 6 months. It's got to have a certain protection level for a certain period of time. It'll kind of give you some guidelines of what we're looking for, and then the members of the consortium will have an opportunity to respond back of what they have in their inventory that might meet that need. And then so say I got 10 responses back on that. We'll go through all 10 responses and see which ones look like they actually are moving in the right, technically can do what they say they do. And we'll sit down, let's say we pick 3. We'll sit down with 3 companies and they'll walk through with us, here's what I got, here's my technical approach, here's where I think I can be, this is our estimated cost over time. We'll map out the tasks to get there, and at some point we'll pick 1, maybe 2, to then fund. And then something that looks like it's moving in the right direction, but maybe is not one of the highest priority of like the 3. The third might be do what we call put in the basket. We have a basket that sits there. That proposal will sit for a period of time. If we have available funding later or the priority increases, we may put money into it later as well. Again, that's another thing about the OTA that we like that's pretty useful, is that we have the ability to go back. You may have been initially non-selected, and then we can come back and say, can you still do it, because we may now have money available. But that's typically the approach. Is we'll put out a request with some very general requirements of what we're trying to do, respond back to us in the form of a phase 1 kind of white paper and quad chart of initial idea of what you got, what it could look like, roughly cost. We'll then come sit down with you and map out task by task by task by task what it takes to get to the end point. We'll map out what does it cost to do each task. And then once the negotiations are done, then we basically write the contract and send the check. That's typically how it works. So like I said, we've done that as fast as 159 days. Some of the medical ones have taken as much as a year and 3 months. Because when you start getting into very technical discussions, when you get all the PhDs together arguing, sometimes cost goes up or performance goes down or something, and we have to decide what is the allowable trade space for the services, because the services will give us a specific requirement. We got to meet that. If we're not meeting that, we're not going anywhere. Does that help?
So a lot of it you're originating from the services telling you they have a requirement.
Yeah. So the service will say, the surgeons generals within each of the services, plus the joint staff surgeon general, will give us a general indication of what they want. Now, they usually write the requirement relatively broad because we don't know what's out there, and if we are too specific, then we actually eliminate things that might have been good enough. We have a hard time of taking things that are not, wanting perfection when good enough is good enough. All right, particularly within the medical realm, if you want something that's 97% efficacious, and that's the requirement bar you have to meet immediately, that potentially is going to cost a lot of money and take a lot of time to prove. If 65% is enough, then you should go for 65% as the initial capability and see if you can get it better. That will drive down costs. That will maybe bring along faster development.
Is there a mechanism for industry to look at requirements and say, oh, we have something for that? Or
so, I'll go back to, if you have anything that works against a pathogen, virus, toxin on the CDC category A and B biothreat pathogen list, that biothreat list, we're interested to hear from you. We have an anthrax vaccine, but it's not perfect. We potentially may want to look at something new. We have a smallpox vaccine. We still can't give it to everybody. So there's things that we already have in the inventory we may go back and look at. They would be lower priority though. If we can hit 95% of the force, it's not a high priority. If we're only hitting 50% of the force, it might be something we're still interested in trying to pursue, right? But if you go down that list, those specifically are ones that we're looking at. We're also looking broadly at antimicrobial resistance and how do we defeat that. We're looking at broad spectrum antivirals. How do we defeat viruses in general? Not specifically flu, but viruses in general. Yeah, that's kind of what we're working on. Am I out of time? All right. So I think I gave you a good amount of information. I'm meeting with a bunch of folks the rest of the afternoon, but I'm around. Slides have additional information on how to contact me. We have both tech watches that we do. So every week I have 2 to 3 tech watches that come in. If you want to come in and sit down with my team, talk about what you have, I will put my PhDs next to your PhDs and let them talk, and we'll see if we have some synergy there. We also have opportunities to do operational tests in the field with soldiers to give you feedback in the field. So we do all that. So I have the full spectrum capability of interacting with you, letting you know if it's good or not good, and we will be very to the point. If it's not going to work, I'm going to tell you it's not going to work. I'm not going to play games with you. I'm going to tell you, yeah, this is not what we need. I'll be very upfront with you on that so you don't waste your time and effort coming to us. But if I know who you should be talking to, I will also do my best to tell you that's the Defense Health Agency, not Defense Threat Reduction Agency. I'll try and make sure you know who in the government you should talk to, or BARDA, or HHS, or whoever. All right, good. So thanks a lot. I think we had a good discussion, and appreciate it.